Okay, so yesterday we did what are the different parts of the brain, alright, and then we did the cerebrum, which is the largest and one of the most important parts of the brain. Today we'll do the other parts of the brain. Before that we have to do the protective coverings of the brain, right? Your brain is a very important organ. Even the slightest damage to it can heavily cost you, right? And we also know that neurons don't normally regenerate. Overall neurons don't regenerate, so our best attempt should be to protect it. So the outermost covering which protects it is your bone, the cranium, right? There are different cranial plates, the occipital plate, the parietal plate, which mainly covers and protects your brain. When you are doing the bone system, at that time we'll do the parts of the cranium in detail. Okay. Apart from the cranium, there are meninges. Okay, meninges which protect your brain. These are the same coverings of the brain which are present in the spinal cord as well. Alright. These meninges which surround your brain are your dura mater, your arachnoid matter, and your pia mater. Alright, the innermost is your pia mater, then the middle one is arachnoid matter, also called the arachnoid membrane, and the last one is dura mater. Alright, arachnoid membrane it gets its name because it looks like a spider web. Right, arachnoids are spiders, so it looks like a spider's web. That is why it is given the name arachnoid matter. Dura mater, in most of the regions in the brain, the outer covering, it forms two layers, alright, and within those two layers, the gap is called sinus, which is filled with the fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, which we'll do in detail later. Okay, so if you see this is the frontal plate through which you have taken a section. Alright, this is your dura mater, the greenish thing. Alright, it is the outermost covering. Just below it is your arachnoid membrane. Right, it looks like a spider web. Okay, and the last one, this red one which you can see, is your pia mater. Right below it is your cerebral cortex. Right, there are certain regions where your dura mater forms two layers and inside it is filled with fluid. This space which it forms is called a sinus. Alright, this sinus which runs through your brain is your superior sagittal sinus. There are other sinuses also, we will name them later. Alright, your cranial meningitis, dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. Okay, right above it is your cranium. In this region is your parietal bone of the cranium, and above it is the skin. Right. Remember, your brain actually floats in your cranium. It never touches the bone. Alright. And in many cases, especially when there is a tumor in your brain, a benign or a malignant tumor, what happens is, due to the enlargement of the tumor, your brain presses against the cranium, right? And this can cause damage, alright, and cause serious consequences. Okay. In this villi, in this sinus, there are projections coming from the arachnoid membrane called the arachnoid villi, right? The important function of these villi is that through these the veins pass and they absorb the cerebrospinal fluid. Alright. Okay. Remember your brain, okay, it just forms about 2% of the total weight of the body, but its energy needs, its oxygen needs is almost 20% of the whole body. That means it requires high amount of energy, and it also has good amount of blood supply. Alright. The two main arteries which supply blood to your brain are internal carotid and vertebral arteries. Okay. They actually circle the villus vessels. That is, they are present around your dura mater, the outermost membrane, and that is on the surface, and then they even penetrate inside the tissue. But remember, even though they penetrate, they actually never come in contact of a neuron because of the blood-brain barrier. We have discussed this blood-brain barrier before. Alright, this is formed because even in the capillaries, the endothelial cells which are there, they have tight junctions. Alright, and just behind those endothelial cells, there are your various neuroglial cells and their projections, and they secrete specific chemicals which keeps the endothelial cells from becoming penetrative, and that is how they maintain the blood-brain barrier. Blood never actually comes in contact of any of your neural cells. Alright, why this is important? Why the blood-brain barrier is important? Because there may be harmful contents in your blood, and you don't want them to reach your brain. Harmful substances like toxins. Alright, if you are suffering from any kind of infection or any kind of microorganisms which are circulating in your blood, you don't want them to enter your brain. That is why this blood-brain barrier is there. And most of your normal antibiotics which you take cannot pass this blood-brain barrier. That is why it is very difficult to control an infection if it is in your brain. Alright, you require special kind of medicine which can actually penetrate your blood-brain barrier. But in most of the cases, if there is a massive infection in your brain, it is very difficult to control. Alright. Before we go to cerebrospinal fluid, we will talk about ventricles. What are ventricles? Ventricles are hollow cavities inside your brain. There are 4 main ventricles. There are 2 lateral ventricles. Then there is a 3rd ventricle and the 4th ventricle. These ventricles are the places where your cerebrospinal fluid is formed, is secreted or filtered from the blood, and from there it circulates around your brain. Alright. Why is this cerebrospinal fluid important? Because, alright, we know that the blood does not actually reach the axons or the neurons, the neural cells, but we know that there is a requirement, a high amount of requirement for oxygen. Alright, your neural cells only use glucose as their source of energy. They cannot use any other carbohydrate source. Also, they do not have storage capacity for these glucose. So you have to supply this glucose to your brains all the time. Alright. So, still these requirements have to be met, right? So, the places where your blood-brain barrier is made, there are special cells called the ependymal cells. These cells cause filtration of the blood, also secretion, and they overall make this fluid called the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, it's a clear liquid. It has water, oxygen, glucose, proteins and ions. It continuously circulates around the brains. Within it circulates in the ventricles. It also circulates in the central canal. Okay, central canal is present in your spinal cord and the subarachnoid space, and also in the various sinuses which we are talking about. Its main function is homeostasis, right? To maintain the brain supplied with all the nutrients. It has it gives mechanical protection, right? When we talk about mechanical protection, it does not allow, whenever there is little trauma in your brain, it can act as shock absorbers because it is circulating around your brain. Okay?
There are the 4 ventricles.
I'll show you the ventricles. We'll come to the ventricles again. which is talking about cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. Chemical protection, mainly by forming a blood-brain barrier. Right, it does not allow harmful chemicals to reach your brain. That's it. Okay. Ventricles. So there are two lateral ventricles, one within each cerebral hemispheres. Alright, the third ventricle, and then there is a fourth ventricle which goes deeper towards your spinal cord, and then it continues as the central canal inside your spinal cord. Okay. The fourth ventricle, deepermost layer, continues as the central canal. I'll show you the diagram. Okay. Ventricles are the places where your cerebrospinal fluid is produced by choroid plexus. Choroid plexus have these cells called the ependymal cells. Alright. Ventricles is the place where circulation starts, and then the cerebrospinal fluid circulates in the ventricles and around your brains. Alright. As I said, those arachnoid villi which are present in various sinuses, their main function is to absorb back the cerebrospinal fluid inside the blood. So what happens is, there is blood supply near these areas, especially near these areas, choroid plexus. From there, the blood is filtered, alright, and various extra things are added to it, and cerebrospinal fluid is made. The cerebrospinal fluid circulates in the various ventricles and around the brain, and then again it is absorbed back into the blood only by the arachnoid villi. Now, because the rate of reabsorption and secretion is maintained in such a way that there is a net pressure through which cerebrospinal fluid circulates. Right? To circulate, it requires a certain amount of pressure to be built up. It is because of this secretion and absorption that pressure is built up. Okay? When you are talking about the ventricles, if you see it from the side, alright, again, this is your posterior, anterior, we are just having a transparent look through the cerebral cortex. These are your ventricles, right? In each hemisphere there is a lateral ventricle. They meet in the middle. At the end they are separated by a small thing in between, which is called the septum. Alright, it's not shown over here, it will be there in the next diagram. No, not that. There is a septum in between somewhere over here which separates the two. Alright, just below it then comes your third ventricle. Alright, and your third ventricle then continues inside your fourth ventricle. This is your fourth ventricle, which further goes and forms your central canal. Alright, there are three openings through which from the ventricle the cerebrospinal fluid actually enters and circulates around the brain. Alright, these openings are your median aperture and your lateral apertures. Lateral apertures are on the either side. Alright, I have another diagram. The duct which connects the third ventricle and the fourth ventricle is called your aqueduct of the midbrain, also called the cerebral aqueduct. Okay, this is a better diagram. This is the sagittal section, right, of your brain and the lower spinal cord. Okay, these are lateral ventricles. Alright, just here, over here are your choroid plexus, the ependymal cells which actually secrete the cerebrospinal fluid. Right, then those are lateral ventricles. Over here is your third ventricle. Alright, again these are the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Right, each ventricle has its own choroid plexus which adds on to the cerebrospinal fluids. The first two lateral ventricles will secrete little cerebrospinal fluid. Then the choroid plexus of the third ventricle will secrete more, which will be added to the initial cerebrospinal fluid. When your fourth ventricle, if you see, alright, even it has the choroid plexus here in this case. Okay, and then there are median apertures, one on this and one on will be the opposite side of the wall. through which your cerebrospinal fluid will enter the spaces. If you see these arrows, this is the whole circulation path of your cerebrospinal fluid. Alright? And the sinus which you are seeing, this is your sagittal sinus. Right? Is there any questions in this diagram? Are you sure? Okay. Okay. This is again the to your frontal plane. Alright. Again you will see the two lateral ventricles in this. Right. This is the septum I was talking about. Septum pellucidum, and the floor of the choroid plexus in your lateral ventricle, right, which follows third ventricle, and then comes your fourth ventricle. This duct which connects the third ventricle and fourth ventricle is your cerebral aqueduct, also called the aqueduct of your midbrain, because it is passing mainly to your midbrain. Alright. These structures which you see, tentorium cerebelli, okay, these are the places where dura mater projects inside and it separates the cerebellum from the cerebrum. Tentorium cerebelli. Similarly, there is falx cerebri, which separates the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. Similarly, it's not shown over here, but if you see it from the other view from that side, there is a cerebelli falx, right? Falx of the cerebelli, which again divides the cerebellum into hemispheres. Alright? Is this structure clear? These are your lateral apertures, your medial apertures, which goes inside your central canal. Is this clear? Okay. So, after the coverings of your brain, the important parts of your diencephalon. Remember I explained you what is diencephalon? It's actually an embryological, a part of your fetus to be precise, which later develops into the three structures which form part of your brain. Collectively they are called the diencephalon. Alright, these three parts are your thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus. Okay, it extends from the brain stem to the cerebrum and surrounds the third ventricle. We will see the diagram for this. Alright. Okay. So now we will discuss each of the parts of the diencephalon in detail. We will start with the thalamus. Alright. This is how the thalamus looks if you remove it compared to the rest of your brain. We will see the exact position of the... No. In your brain it's only grey and white. We have given those colors to identify different regions of it. Alright. The whole thing together is called a thalamus, but mainly it is divided into two separate structures and it is joined by a thick band of grey matter. This is called the intermediate mass. Alright. Mostly they are formed of the grey matter. You can see those Y kind of a space. Those are little bands of white matter in between. They are called the internal medullary lamina. Okay. Just before we go ahead, let me tell you, inside your brain and even inside your spinal cord, remember you have your sensory axon. Alright. Your sensory axon will take it to the interneuron in most of the cases. Then your interneuron will pass it, will do the processing and then take it to the motor neuron, right? There are three different neurons which are possible. Okay? Ideally, inside your body, there is not a single neuron in each of these cases. There are many neurons. There are many sensory neurons. There are many interneurons. There are many motor neurons. Right? So you can consider forming a synapse, alright? Something like this. All these neurons together, alright, the axons travel together, right? These axons together inside the spinal cord and inside the brain is called a tract. Alright, if it's made up of the sensory neurons, it is called a sensory tract. If it is made up of the motor neurons, it is called the motor tracts. Alright, and in most of the cases, sensory neurons, the impulses travel from the periphery towards the central nervous system, let's say towards your spinal cord, and from the spinal cord towards the brain. Alright, that is how the pathway of your sensory neurons go. That is why sensory tracts take impulses from the spinal cord to the brain. Right? That is why they also call the ascending tracts. Right? They are ascending from the spinal cord to the brain. Right? So they are called the ascending tracts, the sensory tracts. And the motor tracts take signals from the brain to the spinal cord and then to the periphery. So the motor tracts are also called descending tracts. Alright? These words, tracts, will come again and again when we are talking about the brain. Also,
this is an aggregation of the
axons. Alright? And the aggregation of the cell bodies, is called your nuclei. Right? I told you this yesterday also. These are called your nuclei. And mostly inside your brain, every nuclei has a specific function related to it. And in these structures also, like the thalamus, your hypothalamus, alright, these nuclei, even in the parts of your midbrain, medulla oblongata, these nuclei are present and they are associated with some of the other function. Are these terms understood? Okay. So, your thalamus itself is made up of many nuclei as well as tracts. Alright. So, it's a paired, right? Remember there were two. So, it's a paired oval masses organized in nuclei. Each of those pairs have various nuclei inside it. Right? Those colored things were different nuclei. To distinguish them, we've given it colors. Alright. With interspersed tracts of white matter. Alright. Your tracts, as I said, are always the axons. So they will always be white in color. And your nuclei will always be grey in color because they are made up of the cell bodies which have the missile bodies, right? Which give them the grey color. Alright. Then there is this intermediate mass. It is also called the interthalamic addition. It joins the right and the left halves of the thalamus. It's a bridge of grey matter. Okay, it's mainly made up of the grey matter. If you see the overall function of the thalamus is a major relay station for sensory impulses that reach the primary sensory areas of the cerebral cortex from the spinal cord and the brain. Remember, a lot of structures inside your brain mainly act as relay stations. What are relay stations? They take information from one neuron and pass it to the next neuron. Right? From various different neurons they take input, integrate it, and give it to some other part of the brain. So most of them act as relay stations. This integration is very important. Like, as I'm speaking right now, alright, you are getting various sensory perceptions from me. You are listening to me, you are visually seeing the presentation, right? There is a thought processing going on. All of these have to be combined together and then sent to a particular cerebral part of your brain where it will be stored as memory, right? So integration of signals, auditory signals, visual signals, perceptory signals inside your brain, all of them have to be integrated first and then sent to your cerebral cortex, some region in your cerebral cortex or other parts of the brain where it will be saved as memory, right? That is why you will recall this lecture later. That integration is done by various different parts of your brain depending on from where the signal is coming. They act as relay stations, right? To take information and pass on. Also integration happens. So thalamus is one of the major relay stations, alright? It relays information from your spinal cord, mainly from your spinal cord to the cerebrum, and from your cerebrum back to the spinal cord, alright? And the brainstem, okay? Crude perception of pain, pressure, thermal sensations is at thalamus, but exact location depends on positions at cerebral cortex. Alright? If I hit you on your hand, alright, that pressure will be felt by you. Okay? The perception that you are actually feeling the pressure, alright, that is originated inside your thalamus. But the exact location where you are feeling the pressure, that is right now you are feeling the pressure on your hands, but the exact location is defined by your cerebral cortex. Are you getting it?
Yeah.
Okay. It also contributes to motor functions. We spoke about sensory functions. It relays sensory messages. It also has motor functions. It does this by transmitting information from the cerebellum and the basal ganglia to the primary motor area of the cerebral cortex. Remember we did this. Primary motor area of the cerebral cortex. Remember?
Yes, yes.
Your whole homunculus, more what do we say? Nerves inside your hand and your face than compared to your body. Okay. Primary motor area, so what does it do is it transmits information from the cerebellum and basal ganglia to the primary motor area. Okay. When we do the functions of cerebellum, we will understand that why all your motor function has a feedback mechanism in your cerebellum. Okay, when we are talking about cerebellum, we will do that in detail. It also relays impulses between areas of cerebrum. Alright. Also plays role in regulation of autonomic activities and maintenance of consciousness. When you are doing the autonomic nervous system, we will talk about these functions of the thalamus. Thalamus is also made up of these important structures. Internal capsule is a thick band of white matter lateral to the thalamus, through which axons pass, connect the thalamus and cerebral cortex. Alright. We'll see the internal capsule. Also there is internal medullary lamina. Alright, I already showed you this, the white Y-shaped band. This vertical Y-shaped sheet of white matter which divides the grey matter of each side of thalamus is made of axons that enter and leave the thalamic nuclei. Okay? So, if you kind of make your brain transparent and if you see this oval kind of the structure is your thalamus. Alright? Now if you take a sagittal section and you see thalamus, you can see the intermediate mass. Right? Okay? Now, your thalamus itself is made up of different nuclei. Alright? This area makes your medial nuclei, your anterior nuclei, your ventral anterior nuclei, your lateral dorsal nuclei, your ventral lateral nuclei. These are different nuclei and they have various different functions. Ventral posterior, lateral geniculate, medial geniculate, pulvinar, lateral posterior. Alright. The good thing is midline nuclei, reticular nuclei. The good thing is you don't have to remember all these names. For your exams you don't have to remember all these names. You have to just remember the 4 different groups in which your nuclei are organized. Right? So based on position and functions, there are 7 major nuclei on each side of the thalamus. Each side, alright? Each side. Both the halves have the same nuclei. There is your anterior nucleus. Its functions is mainly related to regulation of emotions, alertness, memory. Your medial nuclei, it is mainly related to cognition. Cognition is the process of thinking and knowing something, right? Then you have your lateral group, in which you have the 3 nuclei: lateral dorsal, which is related to emotions again, lateral posterior and pulvinar nuclei. These 2 are related to integrating the sensory information, right? I told you. I gave you an example. Then there is a ventral group, in which there is your ventral anterior nuclei. It is related to movement of planning. Like now I'm going to walk, now there are stairs, so I have to walk in this particular manner. Right? Then there is your ventral lateral nuclei. Okay? It regulates, it balances between your right and your left side. Remember, if you're walking, you're running, your right and your left side has to be coordinated. Okay? Then you have your ventral posterior nuclei. It relays the sensory informations of touch, pressure, vibration, heat sensations. Alright? Then you have your lateral geniculate. Relays sight sense from retina to the primary visual area. Remember, we did the primary visual area. It is the sensory area in your cerebral cortex. And your medial geniculate, which relays hearing sense from ear to primary auditory area. Again, primary auditory area is present in your cerebral cortex. So it's a relay station, right? The thalamus. So it will take major sensations like hearing from ears and pass it to certain part of your cerebral cortex, like the primary auditory area. Is this clear, the overall function of the thalamus and the various parts of it? Okay? These are still those were the 4 and these were the 3 rest of the major groups of nuclei. Intralaminar nuclei, those Y-shaped structures, white bands. Even within them there are small cell bodies. They make your intralaminar nuclei. They lie within the internal medullary lamina, and they function in arousal from sleep. Alright? When you are sleeping, you have to get up, right? So that function is done by your intralaminar nuclei. Also integration and pain perception. Alright? Then there is your midline nucleus. It's a thin band near your third ventricle. It is mainly related to your memory olfaction. What is memory olfaction? Like the smells which you remember for a long time. The typical smell of the dish which your mom makes. Right? You can remember it even after 5, 10, 15 years. It's because of this part of your brain, midline nucleus. And then there is your reticular nucleus. Okay, the main function of your reticular nucleus is to see whether all the other thalamic nuclei are working properly or not, right? So it monitors, filters, integrates activity of other thalamic nuclei. 7 nuclei of thalamus in short. Alright? Is this clear? This is one of the transverse section to your thalamus. Okay? After your thalamus comes your hypothalamus. Alright? Somewhere here is your thalamus. This region of the brain is hypothalamus. Remember, hypothalamus is linked to your pituitary gland. Okay, pituitary gland is also called the master gland of what? Of the endocrine system. So we'll talk about the pituitary gland when we study endocrine system in detail. Okay, hypothalamus appears to be small compared to overall brain, but it has very important functions. Okay, and your hypothalamus itself is made up of many different nuclei. Each and every capsule kind of thing you see is a nuclei which has a specific name and specific function. The good thing is you don't have to remember the names of all of them. Alright, but you have to remember the areas in which each of this is divided. Alright, so it is located inferior to the thalamus. The hypothalamus located inferior to the thalamus. It has 4 major regions. The first one is your mammillary region, right? it is similar to your, the name is similar to your mammillary glands because mammillary means because it's nipple shaped. Yeah, that is why it derives its name from there. That is why it is called the mammillary region. Alright. It is adjacent to the midbrain posterior most part of the hypothalamus. Alright. It has something called your mammillary bodies, which is very important, and it is a relay station for sense of smell. Alright. It also has the posterior hypothalamic nuclei. Right. So if you look over here, this is your posterior hypothalamic nuclei, right? And these are your mammillary bodies. This part is your mammillary region. Okay? The next region is right adjacent to it, which will be this region, which is made up of your dorsomedial nucleus. That will be your tuboral region, right? It is made up of the dorsomedial, ventromedial and arcuate nucleus. Infundibulum is also a part of your tuboral region. Infundibulum connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. So, dorsomedial nucleus, ventromedial nucleus, arcuate nucleus, all of them together form your tuboral region, the second part of your hypothalamus. Alright, and infundibulum is the part which joins the hypothalamus to your pituitary gland. It is also considered a part of your tuboral region. The third part of your hypothalamus is your supraoptic region. Alright, it is superior to the optic chiasma. Alright, optic chiasma is the place where your optic nerves cross over. Alright, we'll do this in detail when we are talking about the eye. Your supraoptic region is made up of paraventricular, supraoptic, anterior hypothalamic, suprachiasmatic nucleus. Alright, these are different nucleus which is present inside a hypothalamus. Okay. Axons of paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei form the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Right. You will see this tract again in detail when we are talking about the endocrine system. Right. The pituitary gland is made up of two parts, the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary secretes hormones. Posterior pituitary itself does not secrete hormones, but the hormones liberated by our posterior pituitary comes from this hypophyseal tract, right, which extends to the infundibulum to the posterior lobe of the pituitary. Okay, and the fourth part is called your preoptic region. So, see, here is your optic chiasma. These are part of your supraoptic region, and then these are part of your preoptic region. Right? So, anterior hypothalamic nucleus, suprachiasmatic nucleus, paraventricular nucleus, all these three are part of your supraoptic region, and the last part, the lateral preoptic nucleus and the medial preoptic nucleus, are part of your preoptic region. Alright? Is this diagram understood? Okay. Now, the main functions of your hypothalamus. Why, though it's a very small part of your brain, why is it so important? Okay. Hypothalamus functions. Control of autonomic nervous system. Alright, we'll do autonomic nervous system in detail. Just to give you a brief, autonomic nervous system is the one which controls most of your involuntary actions. Involuntary actions like movement of the food inside your intestine, from your stomach inside your intestine. Okay. So your autonomic nervous system controls most of your involuntary muscle movement, right? The smooth muscle movement. It also controls the beating of your heartbeat, the decrease and increase in the lumen of your arteries and veins, right? All of that is done by our autonomic nervous system. We'll do that in detail later. But remember, your autonomic nervous system in turn is controlled by your hypothalamus, right? So hypothalamus regulates the ANS, which regulates contraction of smooth and cardiac muscles and secretion of glands. Many of your endocrine gland secretion is indirectly dependent upon hypothalamus. Alright. Axons which extend from the hypothalamus to sympathetic and parasympathetic nuclei in brainstem and spinal cord. Are you sure it's on? Your sound नहीं आ रहा है.
Sure.
So,
What do you think?
put up. Okay. These sympathetic and parasympathetic nuclei are also involved in your ANS. Alright. So, there are axons which extend from hypothalamus to these nuclei, because through axons the hypothalamus will control these nuclei, right? Alright. Through the ANS, hypothalamus is a major regulator of visceral activities which takes place in the viscera, which are involuntary, away from the brain. The heart rate, the food movement, the urine flow from bladder, etc. All of this is under the control of ANS, which is in turn control of your hypothalamus. Okay. Other functions of the hypothalamus, main function is the urinary bladder. Remember, we have done, they have two different sphincters. One is involuntary and one is voluntary. Right? So the voluntary one is the one which you can control. Involuntary one is in control of your ANS. And remember, the voluntary one also you develop it with age to control it. Right? When you are small, you are not able to control it voluntarily. As you grow, you are able to control that particular sphincter, right, the circular muscle, with age. But it's not an absolute control of yours. Remember, after that threshold is reached, right, you won't be able to control that particular sphincter. Alright, and there will be discharge of urine then. Okay, apart from that, the other functions of your hypothalamus would be regulation of emotions and behavior, control of body temperature. See, it's a main organ which controls homeostasis. Right, so it controls, main function is to control the autonomic nervous system, apart from the things which maintain homeostasis, like control of body temperature, regulation of circadian rhythms. What is circadian rhythms? They are 24-hour rhythm of the body. Abhi khana hai, abhi peena hai, abhi sona hai. Alright, that is controlled by your hypothalamus. And regulation of eating and drinking. Right, for example, there is a thirst center. There are certain cells of your hypothalamus which check the osmotic pressure. So when there is less water in your body, your osmotic pressure will decrease or increase. Your osmotic pressure will increase, right? Less water, more solutes. So yes, these cells will detect that, and then they will give you a sensation of thirst. Through your hypothalamus, you'll get a sensation of thirst, and you'll go and drink water, right? As soon as you drink water, your osmotic pressure will decrease. Alright. Then another important function of your hypothalamus is the production of two important hormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Okay, we have seen the functions of antidiuretic hormone in excretion. Right, oxytocin also we have seen it is related to discharge of milk and parturition in females. Alright. Apart from these two important hormones, it also secretes hormones which in turn stimulate the pituitary to secrete hormones. Most of your releasing hormones, gonadotropin releasing hormone, right, other stimulating hormones, thyroid stimulating hormones, they are secreted from your hypothalamus, which so your hypothalamus secretes hormones which stimulates the pituitary gland to make certain hormones, right? Okay. After your hypothalamus, there comes your epithalamus. Epithalamus is just present. I'll show you the structure. It is superior and posterior to your thalamus. Superior, matlab little above, and behind your thalamus. It consists mainly of your pineal gland and your habenular nuclei. Alright. Your pineal gland is pea-sized and it secretes the hormone melatonin. Alright. Which promotes sleepiness and it also acts as a controls the biological clock. Alright. Pineal gland was thought to be vestigial, but now we know it secretes an hormone called the melatonin. Okay, your melatonin secretions will be very high during the night, which will cause you to sleep. Alright. Obviously, it depends on your circadian rhythms. Biological clock is, again, it is related to your circadian rhythms. Right. Within your day, even if you consciously don't think, there are certain activities which you will do at a particular time only. There will be normally, alright, there will be a particular time at which you will sleep, there will be a particular time at which you will become, which you will be awake, there will be a particular time when you will feel hungry, alright, mostly, there is a rhythm inside your body, alright, and it is set by the biological clock, alright. Biological clock is also related, see, you have your own age, I am 25 years old, 26 years old, 17 years old, right. But your brain itself has its own biological clock, and that is why you have a biological age. Right? Okay. There was this doubt which Dhwani asked the other day that, every day you have an habit, you have kept an alarm that you are awake at, let's say, 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay. You have this habit for quite some months now. And what happens is, on a particular day, even if your alarm doesn't go on, alright, your alarm doesn't go on, you still wake up exactly at 5 o'clock. Right? This is because over a period of time, your biological clock and your circadian rhythms have set your body in such a way that this is your time to wake up. Okay, it's not a permanent thing, it can definitely change, but it will take a lot of time to change again.
So if we do a particular thing at a particular time, for a long time, so will we
Yeah, alarm clock, if you have a habit of getting up at 5 o'clock, initially you will need the clock, right? The alarm to ring loudly so that you are awake at 5 o'clock. But then after a certain, it depends from individual to individual. After a certain period of time, even if the alarm clock doesn't ring, you will have a habit of getting up at 5. It doesn't mean that 1 or 2 days, at the max 3-4 days when your alarm clock doesn't go on or at 5, you'll get up. But maybe from the 6th day, if you don't keep your alarm, you might switch back to your old habit of not getting up at 5 o'clock. Alright. And then the other part of your epithalamus is your habenular nuclei. Okay, it is related to olfactional and emotional responses to odors. Right. Again, the example of, you go to a restaurant and you order some certain kind of sweet and the aroma reminds you of your mom. Arey, mom aisa khana banati thi. Something like that. Emotional responses to odors. One of the important parts of your brain, that is your cerebellum. Alright? Okay? It's the second largest part of your brain after your cerebrum. Okay? Though it is just 1/10 of the total volume of our brain, but more than half of the neurons, right? We said there are 100 billion neurons. Half of them are present in your cerebellum. Alright? So it's a very important part of your brain. It's posterior to the medulla and pons and inferior to the posterior part of cerebrum. Okay, we'll see the exact position. If you have a posterior view or an inferior view, it looks like a butterfly. Okay, so like how a butterfly has the middle worm region, even your cerebellum has a constricted region which is called the vermis, right? Worm-like. And then there are wings. The wings form your cerebellar hemispheres, the right and the left cerebellar hemispheres. So if you see the diagram, okay, the vermis and the wings form your hemispheres, right?
So vermis is in the center.
Vermis is the central part. Okay, you're having a superior view. You're having a look at it from above. You see these lobes, anterior lobes, posterior lobe. Okay, so just to show you the position of your cerebellum, it is posterior to your pons and your midbrain. Alright, it's posterior to the brainstem, and it is inferior to your, somewhere here is the posterior part of your cerebrum. So it is inferior to the posterior part of the cerebrum, right? There is a fissure which separates the cerebellum and the cerebrum, if you remember. What's the name of that fissure? Transverse fissure. Good. Okay, we'll come back to the diagram again. Okay, now again there are grooves and fissures which actually divide the cerebellum. Okay, these are the fissures which are going, they are not given any specific name, which actually divide the cerebellum into different lobes. So you have the anterior lobe, you have the posterior lobes, then you also have the floccular nodular lobe. It is somewhere inferior to this. Okay, this is the superior view, right? So if you have the inferior view, right, if you see it from below, you will see this node, floccular nodular nodes, right? Okay, your cerebellum actually sits on the brain stem, right? Near the brain stem, it sits on it. So you will have these cerebellar peduncles. We'll talk about these peduncles in detail. The superior, middle, and the inferior peduncles. What are they? We'll talk about them in detail. Okay. So your anterior and posterior lobe, okay, their functions are something like this. Subconscious movement of your skeletal muscles, right? Then your floccular nodular lobe, okay, it, which is on the inferior side, it contributes to equilibrium and balance. Your cerebellar cortex,
What is the subconscious movements?
when you're sleeping, you move around, right? That is your subconscious movement. It's not done consciously. That is subconscious movement. Okay. Then, if you see your cerebellum, it has a superficial covering called the cerebellar cortex. Okay. It's a superficial grey matter. Grey matter consists of parallel slender ridges called the folia. Alright. So if you see this diagram, these are your folia. Folia means leaves. Right. So they appear like leaves. So that is why it is given the name as folia. Right. Parallel ridges. You see, this thing is a ridge. Parallel ridges. Okay. And they are made up of the grey matter. This whole thing is a cerebellar cortex. It is made up of the grey matter. Okay. Then there are white matter tracts deeper to the folia, which is called your arbor vitae. Okay. Arbor vitae also means the tree of life. Tree of life. It appears like a tree, right? See, it appears like a tree with leaves. Tree with leaves. So, arbor vitae. This white thing is given the name arbor vitae. That is the white matter. Okay. You remember the aqueduct of midbrain, right? This is your midbrain region, your pons, your medulla oblongata. Alright. And then you also have the cerebellar nuclei. These are deeper to the white matter, that is to your arbor vitae. They are grey matter regions which give rise to axons which carry impulses from the cerebellum to other main parts of the spinal cord. So if you see this diagram, you have various cerebellar nuclei over here somewhere, from which they give signals towards the brain and even the spinal cord. Alright. There is something known as peduncles. Okay, what are peduncles? These are bundles of white matter which consist of axons that conduct impulses from cerebellum to the other parts. Remember, your cerebellum is sitting posterior to your brain stem, alright, but it almost connects to all the parts of the cerebellum, even the spinal cord. Right? How it connects to these parts? Through axons. All these axons come together and form bundles which are called your peduncles. These are bundles of white matter which consist of axons that conduct impulses from the cerebellum to the other parts. Okay. So there are three paired cerebellar peduncles. There is the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, it carries sensory information from the inner ear and proprioceptors from throughout the body to the cerebellum. Remember we spoke about proprioception. Proprioception means the knowing of your different body parts. Right? My hand is in this position. I know it even if I don't look at it. My leg is in this position. So knowing the exact position of your different body parts is proprioception, which is given to your brain by proprioceptors. Proprioceptors, alright. So most of these proprioceptors pass sensory signals to your cerebellum. Also the inner ear. Okay. Inner ear and these proprioceptors, by knowing the position of your various body parts, you know whether you're standing straight or whether you're going to fall. Right? We said that cerebellum, the lobes, right? We discussed that cerebellum controls the balance of your body. Whether you're balanced, whether you're going to fall. Right? It's because of inferior cerebellar peduncles getting information from the inner ear and the proprioceptors throughout the body to the cerebellum. Then you have the middle cerebellar peduncles. Okay, axons carry commands of movement from cerebrum, from pontine nuclei to cerebellum. Your cerebrum, via the pontine nuclei. Pontine nuclei is something which is present in your pons. We'll talk about it. Gives signal to your cerebellum. Remember, in your cerebrum, there is a region motor region which controls the various body movements. Alright, it is directly connected to the cerebellum. And why is this important? We'll talk about it later. Okay. Then you have the superior cerebellar peduncles. Okay, axons from cerebellum to red nuclei and nuclei of thalamus. So then we have your superior cerebellar peduncles. These are axons from cerebellum which go to the red nuclei and nuclei of thalamus. Red nuclei is a part of your midbrain, and nuclei of thalamus, you've seen there are so many nuclei of thalamus, right? So if you see these peduncles, okay, this is your anterior, right? Your frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe. This is the posterior view. Somewhere here your cerebellum was present. Okay, you have removed it and then you are having a look at the brainstem. So you will see these structures. Okay, so somewhere over here is your outside of the plane is your cerebellum present, and then it extends these axons. So you will see this superior cerebellar peduncles, middle cerebellar peduncles, and your inferior cerebellar peduncles. Are you getting it?
Yeah.
They have not shown the cerebellum, they have removed it, but the peduncles which come from the cerebellum are shown. superior cerebellar peduncles. Okay, it's a pair, right? So there are two, one on this side, one on this side. Then your middle cerebellar peduncles and your inferior cerebellar peduncles. Alright. Then we come towards the functions of your cerebellum. Okay. The main function of your cerebellum is to evaluate how well movements initiated by the motor areas in the cerebellum are actually being carried out. Okay. The motor region in your cerebral cortex will give you the various parts of your body order. Okay, you start walking now. Alright. But actually, is the walking going properly or not? Are the various joints and the various muscles coordinating with each other properly or not? That feedback check is done by your cerebellum. Alright. Cerebellum. Okay, it's cerebellum which detects discrepancies in motor function of the cerebrum and sends feedback to it, which helps smoothing action and coordination of muscles. Right. So your cerebellum gets input from your cerebrum and also from the various proprioceptors and other senses inside your body, and then it coordinates. It checks whether all the movements are going properly or not. Right. It regulates posture and balance. Alright. This is your inner ear. When we are doing the ear as a special part, this is your inner ear regulates posture and balance. Right. Okay. It is also responsible for skilled movements. All the skilled movements which you do. Catching a ball, bowling, the various batting movements, dancing, etc. All that is the responsibility of your cerebellum. Okay. In fact, when you initially start learning to cycle, okay, it's difficult. But once you have learned how to cycle, you can remember it for a very long time, forever, as they say. Because that cycling movement is saved inside your cerebellum. Your cerebellum is responsible for the typical cycling movement, swimming movement. Right. It is also involved in cognition and language processing. That's what they say. But these functions are still obscure. Your cerebellum is very important in maintaining your overall posture. Alright. People who have been hit on the back of the head and the cerebellum has been damaged, it depends on to what extent. Alright. They have problems in walking. They have problems in doing cycling, swimming. Okay. Cerebellum is affected. So till now we have done the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, and now is the final part, which is your brain stem. Alright. Your brain stem in turn is made up of three important parts. Alright. From below to above these go the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. Alright. It's a part of brain between the diencephalon and your spinal cord. Alright. And there is something known as reticular formation also, which extends throughout the brain stem. Okay, so mainly we'll talk about medulla oblongata. Alright. It is continuous with superior part of the spinal cord, forms inferior part of the brain stem. Alright, this is the lowermost region. If you have a look at the brain stem diagram, okay, here is your spinal cord. Right, here is your medulla oblongata. It is the inferior most part. This whole thing is your brain stem. It is the inferior most part of your brain stem. Okay, it is superior to spinal cord but inferior to the inferior part of the pons. This is your pons. Okay, it begins with the foramen magnum, extends till the inferior border of the pons. Right. White matter of medulla has sensory and motor tracts which extend between spinal cord and other parts of the brain. Alright. whenever we are discussing the various parts of the brainstem overall, remember, they mainly have tracts. Both the tracts, ascending and descending tracts. That is one of the most important functions, that they have tracts passing through them. Alright. Some white matter form bulges on the anterior aspect of your medulla. Okay, from now, medulla oblongata, in short you can call it medulla. Alright. So some white matter form bulges on the anterior aspect of the medulla called pyramids, which are formed by corticospinal tracts that pass through the cerebrum to spinal cord. Alright. Okay. Yeah. So if you take the transverse plane, alright, you're having a superior posterior view. Right, this is the anterior and the posterior forms. So these are your pyramids. Alright. They are formed by the tracts which are coming from the spinal cord going towards the cerebrum, or coming from the cerebrum and going towards your spinal cord. Right, the pyramids. Okay? Okay, you can see them over here also. This is the below view of your brain. Right, the pyramids. This is your medulla oblongata, the pyramids. This later on goes inside the spinal cord. Right. Some white matter form bulges on the anterior aspect of the medulla called pyramids. Okay, did you understand what are pyramids? Alright, somewhere over here. There are pyramids. What follows the pyramids is your, okay, superior to the junction of medulla oblongata with spinal cord, 90% of the axons in left pyramid cross to the right side, and 90% of the axons in the right pyramid cross to the left side. This crossing is called a decussation of pyramids. Alright, and because of this decussation, what happens is, okay, this is the junction where your medulla oblongata and your spinal cord will fuse. Alright, just before this junction, 90% of your axons from left are going towards the right, and from right are going towards the left. Right, there is a cross. This point is called your decussation of pyramids. Alright. These will later on go and form the various spinal nerves. Right. Your spinal nerves are a pair of nerves. Because of this crossing over, the opposite thing happens. What is the opposite thing? All the right part of your brain, of your body, is controlled by the left part of the brain. Right? And all the left part of your body is controlled by the right part of your brain. Because here they cross over. Alright, decussation of pyramids.
What was that? I did not know.
Apart from the tracts, right, those axon tracts which we saw, the medulla oblongata also contains many nuclei. Okay, what are nuclei? They are masses of grey matter where neurons form synapses with one another. Several of these nuclei control vital functions. Okay, the nuclei of medulla oblongata control many vital functions. Okay, in medulla oblongata you have your cardiovascular center, which regulates the rate and force of your heartbeat and the diameter of vessels. Alright, both are interrelated. They also have your medullary rhythmicity area of respiratory center. Okay, it adjusts your breathing. That is when you are exercising, you breathe heavily. When you are sleeping, you breathe less heavily. Okay, and it also has other centers, other nuclei which control coughing, vomiting, swallowing, hiccuping, sneezing. All of that is done present in your medulla oblongata. Okay, we'll see the structure. Inferior olivary nucleus is present in olive. Alright, what is olive? It's an oval shaped swelling lateral to the pyramids. Alright, neurons here relay impulses from proprioceptors to the cerebellum. Right? Lateral to the pyramids, there are oval structures called the olive, and inside it there is the inferior olivary nucleus. Okay? Signals coming from your proprioceptors through your spinal cord, through your medulla oblongata, through this nucleus, it goes inside the cerebellum. Right? Okay, there is also something known as medial lemniscus. So, white matter bands that extend to thalamus via medulla pons and midbrain. Alright, when you are seeing the transverse section, I will show you this medial lemniscus. Alright, also associated with the medulla oblongata are other 5 pair of cranial nerves. When you are doing the spinal and cranial nerves in detail, we will talk about them. These nerves are part of your peripheral nervous system. Alright, so if you see this diagram again, just above your medulla oblongata is your pons region. Alright, okay, if you see it in this view, this is your medulla oblongata, the pyramids. Alright, we spoke about middle cerebellar peduncles, right? They extend from the cerebellum towards your brainstem. Here is your pons, this much of region. Alright. So, pons, the word pons itself means bridge. So, it's a bridge which connects parts of the brain with another. It is made up of tracts and nuclei both. Alright. Some axons of pons connect left and right sides of cerebellum. Right, the left and the right hemispheres are connected to each other by certain axons. And other parts of ascending and descending tracts, all of them are passing through your pons. Alright. Nuclei of the pons include the pontine nuclei, which relay impulses related to movement. Right, we spoke of pontine nuclei in terms of cerebellum. Right, the movement impulses from sensory organs go to the pontine nuclei and then it reaches the cerebellum. Right, also there are apneustic area, pneumotaxic area. These are present inside your pons only. They both help in controlling the breathing. They coordinate with the medullary rhythmicity center and control breathing. Alright. So if you have this view, okay, we will see what is the tactum. I just want you to see this medial lemniscus. Medial lemniscus which is present. Okay, this is the transverse plane. Transverse plane through the brainstem. You will see these things. Medial lemniscus. All the other things we'll discuss. Remember we did substantia nigra. Substantia nigra is functionally related to basal ganglia. Remember? Substantia nigra, and there was one more. Subthalamic nuclei. Okay, we'll come back to this diagram again. Above your pons is the midbrain. Okay, it's also called mesencephalon because in the fetus the mesencephalon ultimately gives rise to the midbrain. So it is also called the mesencephalon. It extends from pons to the diencephalon. Diencephalon is your thalamus, epithalamus, hypothalamus. The cerebral aqueducts passes through it. Remember, we've done this again and again. The cerebral aqueduct passes through it. We'll come to it again. It also has both tracts passing through it and it has nuclei. Okay, cerebral. Okay, not cerebral or bilar. Cerebral peduncles, anterior part of the midbrain, tracts which conduct impulses from the cerebrum to other parts. Alright. Peduncles, as we know, are bundles of axons. These are the ones which are coming from your cerebrum going to other parts of the body. Okay, it forms the anterior part of the midbrain. Okay, let's have a look at the midbrain diagram first. Okay, this whole thing is called your midbrain. Alright, it is in between the diencephalon and the pons, right? This is your posterior side and this is the anterior side. Alright, whatever structures we'll talk about will lie somewhere over here. Okay, as we said, the cerebral aqueduct passes through it. Alright. So, cerebral peduncles are the anterior part. Posterior part of the midbrain is called the tactum, which has 4 rounded elevations. Okay, we'll see this in diagram, 4 rounded elevations. Let's have a look at that diagram. Right. So if you remove the cerebellum and if you have a look, okay, this is again a part of your midbrain only, right? These are your cerebral peduncles, right? These two. These are your cerebral peduncles coming from the cerebrum. They form the anterior part of the midbrain. This much is your midbrain. Okay. If you see in the posterior part, so there is a cerebellum which is present. You're removing it and you're seeing the brainstem. This is tectum, the posterior part of your midbrain. It is made up of 4 ridges in all. The upper 2 are called superior colliculi and the below 2 are called inferior colliculi. Okay, this is your median eminence. We spoke about it, median eminence. Right, superior colliculi and inferior colliculi. What are they related to? Okay, 2 superior elevations are called superior colliculi. They act as reflex centers for certain visual activities. Superior ones. Reflex, we'll see in detail what exactly is a reflex. Okay, reflex is you get a sensory input, you integrate, process the information, even if you give an output. The whole pathway is called a reflex. Alright. So it has a reflex center for visual activities, and the 2 inferior elevations called inferior colliculi are part of the auditory pathway, right? Relaying impulses from the ear to the thalamus. Okay, inferior and the superior colliculi. Is that clear? Okay, the midbrain also contains other nuclei like the substantia nigra. Right, we spoke about substantia nigra. Okay, it is involved with subconscious movement or muscle movement. Right, it is a part which damage causes Parkinson disease. Right, then there is your left and right red nuclei. Alright, it is red in color because it has high blood supply. Okay, we'll see all of these in the transverse section. Okay. And axons from cerebrum and cerebellum form synapses here and help in coordinated muscle movements in the red nuclei. Cerebrum and cerebellum axons make synapses and help in coordinated muscle movements. Okay, so if you see that transverse diagram, this is your red nuclei, these are your substantia nigra. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah.
Now we will talk about this reticular formation. Alright, reticular formation is nothing. It's a net-like structure, okay, made up of white and grey matter both. Okay, so white and grey matter make a net-like structure, which is the reticular formation, and it extends. Alright, the whole net extends throughout the brain stem. Okay, grey matter is interspersed in white matter at a lot of places in brain. Net-like arrangement of white and grey matter is called reticular arrangement. Okay, extends from the upper part of the spinal cord through the brainstem in the lower part of the diencephalon. All right, so you consider it like a net. Okay, a thick net which is passing from your lower part of the spinal cord through the brainstem, reaching up to the lower part of your diencephalon. Okay, these have neurons which have both motor and sensory functions. Okay, part of this is your reticular activating system, which consists of sensory neurons that extend to the cerebrum. Alright, reticular activating system is active in awakening from sleep. Right, it is responsible for arousing the cerebral cortex from sleep due to stimuli. So if someone is sleeping, the cerebral hemispheres are not very active. Subconscious level pe they are, but consciously they are not active. Alright, to awaken the cerebral hemispheres from sleep, this RAS, that is reticular activating system, is the one which acts. Alright, so if you see the diagram, okay, it's a transverse section, right? So this whole thing forms the net on both the sides. Okay, it is extending as a perpendicular to the plane of the board. Sorry, your reticular formation. Okay. That's it.